Hello again. Sixth lecture for Chapter 2 will be about organic compounds. So the last one we were talking about different kinds of, or the last two we were talking about different kinds of inorganic compounds. And so now we're going to talk about organic compounds, and organic type compounds are really what our, if you exclude water, all living things are water-based, but if you take out the water, what you have left are mainly lots and lots and lots of organic compounds. They make up the bulk of cells, and therefore they make up the bulk of living things. And again, we're not going to get too hung up on what the differences are between inorganic and organic, but there are a few key things. Organic compounds contain carbon, and most carbon-containing compounds that you find in living things do fall into the organic category. A couple of exceptions are CO2, that's good old carbon dioxide, and CO is carbon monoxide. Those are inorganic carbon-containing compounds. So these organic compounds are unique to living systems or previously living systems. That's how they occur naturally. The organic chemists today, though, are capable of producing these in the laboratory and making them artificially as well. So 4 major categories of organic compounds. So get used to hearing about these because you hear about them in every biology class. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Very important compounds that are the workhorses, the building blocks of our cells, our tissues, and all other living things as well. So we'll actually have separate video lectures which go into a few more details about each of these different types of organic compounds. So start learning. Those are your 4 major types, and that's not too hard to remember because think about what you see on the back of a food label, a nutrition label on something that you're eating. They always provide the carbohydrate content, protein content, lipid content. Lipids better as fats. They don't generally provide the nucleic acid content, but nevertheless, nucleic acids are extremely important, and we'll talk about those later. We just don't typically think of those as something you're taking in as a nutrient from your foods. Okay, so organic compounds, some other features. Many are what we call polymers. So that's a term you should be familiar with. A polymer is a molecule that's built from a chain of smaller molecules that are very similar to each other. And those little individual smaller molecules that get linked together, bonded together, are called monomers or building blocks. Okay, so if you had, earlier on an earlier video lecture, we were looking at a molecule called glycogen, which is an energy storage molecule in our bodies. And remember, we were pointing out that glycogen consists of chains of glucose molecules linked together. So if each of those circles is a glucose, those glucoses are covalently bonded together. They're sharing electrons with each other to help hold them together. So in that case, the glucoses would be your monomers, and your polymer in that case would be the glycogen molecule, that larger carbohydrate. These larger polymers are produced or synthesized through a process called dehydration synthesis. We'll talk more about that. And then they're also broken down by a process called hydrolysis, through hydrolysis chemical reactions, and we'll take a little bit of a closer look at that also. You can kind of tell by both of those terms that water is going to be involved in some way in both making these types of compounds and breaking them down. All right, and there again are our 4 major types of organic compounds. All right, so what do we mean by dehydration synthesis? What do we mean by hydrolysis? What in the world does that mean? These are the types of chemical reactions that take place to build these larger organic molecules, build these chains of monomers. That's dehydration synthesis. And then at other times they have to be broken down, and that's called hydrolysis. So you're going to take these large polymers, these chains of these building blocks or monomers, and you're going to break them apart back down into their subunits. So these processes go on all the time inside living things, because living things are always taking these smaller monomers, these smaller building blocks, and linking them together in different patterns to build different kinds of polymers. And likewise, you often have to break down these polymers as well so that you can recycle and use those monomers for other purposes. So both of these types of reactions are happening all the time. So dehydration synthesis, why is it called that? Because typically the building blocks of these large organic molecules, your proteins, your carbohydrates, your lipids, your nucleic acids, each of those four, they're built from monomers. And when two monomers get bonded together, typically a monomer, now they're not showing you the whole chemical structure here obviously, but you'll have an oxygen and a hydrogen on one, and a free hydrogen or a hydrogen over on a second monomer. And what happens is, as this monomer and that monomer get bonded together, the OH on that monomer gets broken off, and this hydrogen gets broken off, and those two come together. Okay, so OH plus H, those two get bonded together and form water. And now the two monomers are attached to each other through that, let's see, my pen is not wanting to write there, that oxygen right there that's left over. So those monomers are now linked to each other through a covalent bond. So again, you lost, let me erase all this because that looks kind of messy. You lost the OH from that monomer, you lost the H from that one, and they got together and bonded with each other to make water. So in a sense, it's like you lost a water molecule from between those two monomers. So that's dehydration. That's where the dehydration part comes from. And now those monomers wind up bonded together. Okay, so this is a chemical reaction. We were talking about the different types of chemical reactions before, and this is also a building type reaction, synthesis, and remember that is endergonic. It takes energy input to make that happen. All right, on the flip side, sometimes you got to break down polymers so that you have free monomers, these little individual building blocks, because maybe you need to use those for energy, maybe you need to put them together in different patterns. So when they get broken, you basically have the reverse type of reaction, and that's called hydrolysis. Hydrolysis literally means hydro refers to water. Lysis is to split or to break apart. So you're literally using a water molecule to break the bond between two monomers. So that's what they're showing you here in this diagram. You've got two monomers that are linked together. You add a water molecule back, and the OH gets added back to that monomer, the H gets added back to that one, and the two individual monomers, the bond between the two gets broken. All right, so that's why that's called hydrolysis. You're adding a water molecule in order to split those two smaller building blocks apart. And keep in mind, usually when you have these polymers, these larger organic molecules, they're not just going to be two monomers. I mean, they can be, but usually there are a whole lot more monomers linked together in these chains. All right, now here's an example of a real reaction. An example of a couple of monomers. Glucose is a type of sugar, and that would be an example of a monomer of a carbohydrate. Sugar, you guys know sugars are a type of carbohydrate. And then here's fructose. Maybe you've heard of that before. That's also known as fruit sugar a lot of times because fruit has a lot of fructose in it. So those two are monomers, and they're showing you the chemical structures there. And so there's that OH that's going to be lost from glucose, because that's like monomer number 1 up here. And then fructose is going to lose that hydrogen because it's like monomer number 2 up here. Okay, and when that water molecule gets lost, you're dehydrating, so this is dehydration synthesis, and now your glucose and your fructose are linked together, and now you've made a molecule called sucrose. And what do you guys know sucrose as? That's table sugar. So table sugar, or sucrose, molecules consist of a glucose monomer and a fructose monomer that have been bonded together. Now on the flip side, when you need to break sucrose apart, the reaction goes this way. So you add the water back. You do a hydrolysis type reaction to split the glucose and the fructose apart. And that is what happens when we consume sucrose, table sugar, which most of us, we consume a fair amount of sucrose. It's pretty common in our diets. When you swallow that, you need to absorb these sugars through your intestinal tract lining, and you can't absorb sucrose. Sucrose actually has to be split apart into glucose and fructose before you can absorb that from your intestinal tract and into your bloodstream. So we do that type of reaction. That hydrolysis of sucrose is a very common reaction that takes place in our digestive systems. All right, let's see. Hang on, my screen went black here on me. All right, so glucose and fructose are two examples of sugars. And sugars are the building blocks of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are polymers of sugars that get linked together. So that's going to lead us into our next video lecture, number 7, where we will talk in a little bit more depth about what carbohydrates are and what some of their functions are inside our bodies.